CRM system. I've built settlement systems. I've built confirmation systems, different systems around just a general trading life cycle. So I've learned a lot about the commodities over the years, and I'm still learning to this day. I mean, just the lingo alone in the commodities takes a long time to understand. So that's really my background, and most recently we've really been focused on the utilization of artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing. There's a lot of different flavors of AI to really complement your trading applications.
All right, thanks, Mark. I just want to mention that, by all means, raise your hands if you have any questions, burning questions. We don't have to wait until the end of the session for that. Just raise your hand, and my colleague will come to you with the mic. Again, very important to speak into the mic. Thank you very much. So first things first. What are, in your opinion, the right questions you have to ask yourself when you embark in an AI development project? What are the first things you have to consider, and how is that different from a sort of a typical IT project?
Sure. So at a high level, it's really not that different. I mean, with any project, you really want to define what your goals are, what the costs are going to be, the timelines. Security considerations is another big factor. You get departments to buy in. What makes an artificial intelligence, machine learning project unique? It's really the type of problem you're tackling. You really want to go after something that is highly manual, so you can achieve that level of automation. You may want to tackle, large amounts of data that needs to be processed or analyzed. So it's really the type of problem you're solving, the actual, process of managing the project and going about is really not that different than any other project. Artificial intelligence, there's a lot of different flavors, right? You could have RPA, you could apply process automation, and that's sort of a different road that you're going to go down. IDP is now a new one, so document processing, intelligent scraping of data off of documents, natural language processing, and then of course you always have your analytics, analyzing the data and running those heuristic algorithms against the data once it's available.
And I guess one of the questions also is whether you're going to do it on your own, in-house,
yes.
or call one of the consultants or
Yep.
service providers. So let's say you're developing your solution in-house. What sort of skill sets you're requiring there,
Yeah.
to make sure you deploy AI and machine learning in the right way. And also, I guess the second part to that question is, how do you make sure you're able to attract those talents?
So that's a challenge. And as part of that decision is, what tools are you going to make? What tools are you going to select? Where's your computing environment? AI, artificial intelligence, traditionally requires heavy computing. More likely than not, you're going to want to run your AI in the cloud. Do it with one of the major cloud providers, and that way there you don't have the cost of maintaining all the computing power on your internal system. Once you select the tools, and there's a lot available, that's really going to ultimately dictate what type of resources or talent you're going to need in order to execute on your plan. There's a lot of tools that range in sort of wide varieties of do I need a software engineer or a data engineer? Or do I just need a data scientist that knows how to train data? You're always going to need a subject matter expert. Typically, when you're building an artificial intelligence NLP model, you really want to have someone on board the project that really understands the data, really understands how to measure the success criteria. And as you stated, AI is only as good as you train it in certain aspects of the artificial intelligence. We're seeing a lot of progress in that area, which we'll touch upon later in the talk. But a lot of AI involves a lot of training, a lot of planning up front. And you really need to bring in the right engineers to really dictate how to do that in an efficient way. Languages, and I think they touched upon this in the last discussion, it's a lot of it's geared around Python. How do you find and attract that talent? Well, you're competing with a lot of other companies. Every company today has an AI initiative. Every company today is looking for Python developers. Plain and simple, you just got to pay them well. It's no secret there. How do you retain them? Well, obviously you want to be working on challenging projects, something that they're going to be pique their interest, something innovative. And for the most part, a lot of the technology coming out is very innovative, and the talent's going to want to migrate to that as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions from the floor at this point? Not yet. That's all right. So I think we are all after some sort of concrete, real life examples here, especially in commodity trading. Could you give us a few, from your current role as CTW at ClearDox, but also from your past with a hedge fund?
Yeah, so I'm going to go into two examples. One around RPA, and then the other one around just data gathering and processing high volumes of data. So when I first started at this hedge fund, segueing into the commodities space, I worked on I was in charge of building a back-end settlement system. This system took cash flows from multiple ETRMs, and the system's job was to facilitate the payment of all of these cash flows and invoices to the bank, but also to tie out all of the cash transactions coming in from the bank to its corresponding invoice in its respective ETRM system. We were dealing with over 200 different bank accounts. There were teams of people in Excel managing all 200 bank accounts. They separated it by, every person took about 10 bank accounts, was in charge of looking at all the transactions that came in for the day, looking for those corresponding cash flows in the ETRM systems, and just manually matching. So what we did is we took sort of an automated approach that involved machine learning. So you could decipher in some of the reference text coming on these cash payments, at least who the payer was, and maybe the bank account that was making the payment. So you knew that this bank account now belongs to, and I'm just going to throw a couple sample names, BP, for example. And then you could record that. That could feed into your machine learning, and the next time you see a payment from that bank account, you knew that was from BP. Once you recognized who was making the payment, now I could look for all the cash flows as it related to BP, and now you're narrowing down how to actually assign all of the payments over to the invoices. So at the end of the day, the system took about 6 months to build. We built a self-learning feature in, so as the users were interacting with the system, it would learn as they were teaching it which payment went with which invoice. And we reduced a team of about 8 to 10 people down to 1. And we were reconciling over 200 bank accounts on a nightly basis, which, as you can imagine, increased a lot of efficiency throughout the company. The second example I'm going to give is really, so the inception of why we built ClearDox. So again, this was dealing with high transactional amounts of data. The hedge fund that I was working for just got into fracking oil in the Bakken region. All the oil deliveries were done by trucks. They would literally hand off to the operations team a shoebox of trucking tickets that somebody had to look through, manually key in as part of all the deliveries that were taking place. So they came to my team, and we built a machine learning, artificial intelligence platform that was capable of scraping the data off of these documents, putting it into a normalized fashion, and then it was able to pull in the requisite scheduling data from the ETRM systems, and now I could start actualizing all the deliveries. I could start flowing data into the ETRM systems in an automated fashion, and this was all done through just data gathering from what we called unstructured data. So these PDF files were coming in. We had Excel files, which were reports coming from the transload facilities. We also built reconciliations where we could tie out the data. Because at the end of the day, everything's driven off of data. You want to have the data vetted. You want to have it as clean as possible. So by the time you push it into your ETRM system, you know it's quality data, and then you could perform all your downstream functions on that data, such as make sure your trades were hedged properly, everything was up to date, your schedulers knew what was going on in the field, and as near real time as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm wondering, what about AI for, improving decision-making processes? What are your thoughts on that? Examples, perhaps, around that?
Yeah, so AI and just pure decision-making, it's been around for a long time. I mean, there's been algorithmic trading, understanding sort of your inputs and your outputs and your objectives are really key to building those algorithms. There's a lot of tools available for that. Typically, these are run in the background, so that way it can start making those autonomous decisions based upon expected results and the inputs that are being fed in.
Okay. Any questions? That's okay. Now dive into the type of AI you know best, which is the data processing kind. What are the challenges there?
Yeah.
This is purposely a very broad question, but
yeah, it is, and I think you touched upon it in your opening statements. It's really the accuracy of the data, right? So what I've been focusing on almost exclusively in the last 4 to 5 years is just tapping into all of your unstructured data. So companies are receiving data from so many different systems, so many different vendors in all different formats. You might get an Excel file that's representing your pricing curves from bespoke brokers. You might be getting an email telling you where your vessel is on when you're transporting product over the ocean. So data comes in so many different formats. I've really been spending the last 4 to 5 years just digitizing the data, making sure it's accurate, and then flowing it into the respective downstream system. Accuracy has been probably the biggest challenge on some of these more complex documents that may be scanned, they may be handwritten, but from what I've seen is a lot of the OCR tools, a lot of the machine learning that's built on top of that is improving, and it's really making that quality better.
What about data sources for training purposes?
Yeah.
Exclusively,
yeah. So it's when you talk about training, you really want to think, and as everyone's aware, I mean this field is rapidly changing. So we're now seeing products such as ChatGPT, which is opened on large language models. So those are trained on a very, very broad public data sets. So it really depends upon whether you're going with an open model, such as ChatGPT, which is trained on billions of text, or if you're going with a closed model where it's more controlled. So you have more control over the training process. You can do a more targeted training process. The downside to that is it takes longer to train because your model's only as good as what you've trained it on. Yeah.
Of course. So perhaps digging a bit more into that, to the training. What sort of mechanism do you incorporate to ensure continuous learning and,
Yeah.
and performance over time?
Yeah, so you really have to gauge performance on, once you build these models, you really have to understand where they are in when you initially create. That'll be your benchmark, and then you want to measure that benchmark with each incremental training of the model. So for example, you might have 100 pieces of data that you're training on your model. When you train your model, you're teaching the model not only what the input is, but also what the answer should be. You're going to hold out a certain percentage of those training inputs, and that's going to gauge, well, how accurate did the model predict on what you initially trained it. We've actually taken it a step further in the models that we build. We incorporate what we call a holdout set. So we have a reserved set of data that we're actually running against each build of the model, so we can actually gauge how well it's predicting against that set. It's never 100%. You're constantly monitoring how close you are to a high percentage of accuracy, but you really have to gauge and measure that with each incremental build of the model. You're constantly training these models.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps by show of hands, we can see how many of you are deeply involved in AI at the moment. Unless we have only shy people. I don't wanna. Okay, thank you, brave. All right. Okay. Well, this is your chance to ask questions, so don't forget that. My next question to you, Marc, is around the user experience.
Right.
How important is that?
Yeah. So I like to think of if AI is utilized well, the users aren't even necessarily aware that it's there. You think about when you go to Google, you're typing in a search, and it just, as you're typing, it predicts what you think your next word's going to be. There's a lot of work behind that. There's a lot of training behind that. But that's exposed in a really effective way where you're not even realizing there's artificial intelligence, machine learning in your day-to-day use of just doing a simple search. So the user experience, you really want to make it seamless. You really want to incorporate it into their current process or workflow. We're going to be seeing this very shortly in Office products as they start incorporating OpenAI's large language models and generative AI into that. It's really user experience is key, and just it's doing it well if you don't even realize it's there.
Earlier in one of your answers, you mentioned the sort of change in headcounts, right?
Yes.
After an AI project was successful, really. So, what would be your advice, to deal with skeptical or scared team members? How do you go about reassuring them of their role?
Yeah,
that.
And this is not just related to AI ML projects. These are related to any projects in general where the user is going to be experiencing change from their current process. But particularly in AI ML, sort of the myths around that is, am I going to lose my job? Is it going to replace me? I think it's pretty far away from that. I don't think anyone's going to be losing their job. It's going to really, again, be done in a way where it's going to be like your assistant. Like you're going to go in there and it's going to really help you to perform the mundane tasks in your job in an automated fashion. You're going to shift your role more from, I'd say, for example, if you're keying in, bills of lading, rather than keying the bills of lading in, you're going to be now looking at what the system extracted and associated with your trading system. So you're really shifting the user more into a monitoring type role, really freeing them up to do the more of the analytics and more of the interesting things in their job. And I think you got to start slow. You can't just go and replace the user's entire workflow all at once. You really want to start with their biggest pain point and slowly adopt it and slowly start growing. And in my experience, users really embrace it. They really appreciate that they don't have to stay till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. They can now go home early, and they're actually doing more volume than they did when they stayed late.
All right, that sounds positive enough.
Yes.
Right, so now back to the sort of broader AI. What sort of ethical considerations should be taken into account when you deploy AI or machine learning technologies, particularly regarding data privacy, bias, transparency in general? What are the potential risks or limitations you see associated with that?
So we're seeing, especially around the generative AI, so the AI that produces content. I know this hedge fund that I work very closely with was very excited about the prospect of using these large language models to generate documents, right? It's going to automate the creation of LCs. It's going to automate the creation of maybe invoices or these other types of documents. The problem we're facing is you have to really think, how is that model trained? How is this generative AI trained? Was it trained on proprietary data? Because OpenAI is not going to be responsible if you produce content that's copyrighted. So you really have to be cognizant of where the training's coming from. These are open models where you're more at risk. If you're doing a closed model, you have more control over the data that's going in, and then it's not as you're not going to be liable for something that you may have missed.
Thanks. Sorry. So I really feel like there's a lot of myth and misconceptions around AI. What are those in your opinion, and how do you go about demystifying those?
Yeah, and I think we kind of touched upon some of those. AI is not going to come in and take over your job. It's really meant to complement your job. Now, obviously, you got to implement it correctly. You want to implement it where it's enabling users to do their jobs more efficiently. If it's not done correctly, it may hinder, and at that point, users are going to have a bad experience with AI. You don't want to put AI in charge of making decisions when it's not ready. Like you don't want it executing trades, making payments without some type of manual intervention or monitoring. So I think it really boils down to implementing it correctly, and if it's done correctly, everyone's gonna have a positive experience.
That's true. We are reaching the end of this discussion, so really last chance for you to ask your question to Marc. We have a question here. Thank you.
Marc, you mentioned constantly training models. How do you think about the kind of maintenance phase of AI ML projects? So if you implement something, there's going to be an initial flurry and maybe you reach a goal, but like all good projects, they continue. Is there anything different there versus normal software development or business?
I don't think. Software development is iterative. You're constantly updating, soliciting feedback from users. Maybe you're building a UI and you want user input. You're expanding it in different ways. I don't see it much different than that. What's unique here is it's sort of you need your subject matter expert for the training, and it's done iteratively. So as you're running the model. As you're building the model, I should say, there's a pretty big upfront cost, right? So you gotta collect a large amount of training data. You have to make sure that it's annotated properly, so it's training the model correctly the first time around. But again, you got to keep monitoring it. You got to keep training. What's interesting is these large language models are changing that process. These large language models are now trained on a much, much broader training set. And what we're finding is that they do a pretty good job, on stuff that, was very specific to this closed model. These large open models are actually doing a very good job of predicting the results. The challenge on these large models is asking it the right question. There's actually a whole new flavor of engineering called prompt engineering. You have to know how to ask these large language models the right question to get the answer out. So it's actually, the landscape's changing. So it's, you know, I'm really interested to see where we're going to be in the next 2 to 3 years on that. Good question.
Thank you.
Thanks. Before we ask, well, I ask the wrapping up question, there's another question I wanted to ask you, and I guess it's about perhaps, you know, a buy-in from top to bottom or governance, but who is involved in those AI projects?
Yeah,
Is it purely IT? Where do you start?
No, it's you know, and again, just like any project, it's got to come from across the board. You know, we're seeing companies now that have innovation teams that are defining what their AI ML strategy is. As part of that, that's where you're going to decide: do you buy versus build? Do I look for a vendor that can help me on my AI journey, for example? You know, it's hard to find resources in the market. Choosing the right technology or vendors really may be the appropriate decision as opposed to building it in-house. This technology changes nonstop. If you do decide to build, you're going to be constantly evaluating the new technology that's coming out. But you really want your organization to define the strategy all the way from the top. And once you do that, everything's going to trickle down into what's your budget. Do you want to buy versus build? What are you looking to achieve? What are your highest priority projects? And once all those decisions are made, everything's going to start falling into place.
Thank you, Mark. All right, well, the last question now for you. It's you know, looking into the future. What are the trends you see, you know, in near or far future with AI and machine learning in commodity specific?
Yeah, well, I think commodities, you know, and I think they even touched upon it in the last panel. We're just getting so much data flowing in. You know, a lot of these ETRM systems that I've worked on are really geared towards manual entry. They're not really geared towards a large influx of data. Obviously, that can be done via the API, but now you're at the prospect of, well, how do I monitor that large amount of data going into the ETRM to make sure it's accurate, make sure everything's tying out? And that's where you want to start incorporating artificial intelligence, machine learning into the process, not only to gather the data, but to actually figure out how it all fits together, how it all ties out. You know, am I seeing, you know, accurate data from, you know, from my deliveries over to what I have in storage? And then you can start, you know, building all those ancillary apps and you know, upon that quality data. So I really think it's around the data gathering.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's been really interesting to speak to you on that topic. You know, you can always ask your questions to Mark during the lunch that's about to be ready. So this session, you know, closes the trading digitalization track, and it also closes Commodity Trading Week Americas. So I hope you enjoyed it. We did, at least, and I hope we'll see you all next year, and that's going to be in Connecticut, if I'm not mistaken. So thanks a lot, and have a good lunch and afternoon.
Thank you. And just just
Yes,
one plug. So we have another seminar on Wednesday, June 21st. It's online, and we're going to be talking similar topic with a more than just one person panel. We actually have some other companies. They're going to talk digitization as well.
Yes, so if you want to register for that, well, you can scan the little QR code here, or you can just go to Commodities People LinkedIn page, and you'll be able to do that from there. All right?
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
All right.
It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.